Softly now, settle deeper into the quiet. Let your breath find the slow, steady rhythm of a machine that has kept time longer than the memory of empires. Imagine, if you will, a vastness so broad it swallows the edge of knowing, a dark ocean of stars, each one a small, tired lamp in a corridor that stretches beyond sight. This is the Imperium of Man, a sleep-worn colossus, ancient and enormous, a world of iron and prayer and the slow, patient maintenance of things that were built to outlast their builders. There is a particular hush to that place, the kind that gathers itself inside vaults and under vaults, halls within halls, stacked like nested shells. The hush is shaped by breath and brass. It is carved by the long exhalations of reactors and the gentle ticking of servos. When you listen closely, you can hear it, a low, constant hum that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sound of gears that have forgotten why they turn but still turn, because turning is what they were made to do. It is comforting, in a way that belongs to things older than you and kinder than they seem. At the center of that hush sits a throne. Imagine the throne as a single, impossible point of light, not bright like a torch, but warm as a hearth long tended. It is made of gold and alloy and symbols older than language. Ribbons of light fall from it like sleep, thin and measured, bathing the surrounding stone in a softness that could almost be mistaken for mercy. Around that throne, patterns of filigree and circuitry run like veins, and in their hollows the centuries have gathered. In their hollows, countless voices have left their echoes. The prophecies, those murmured shards of what might be and what must be, float through the Imperium like dust motes in that warm light. They are not a single thing, not a single voice. They are threads of thought and broken lines of code, a chorus made of different kinds of silence. Some are recorded in the precise methodical hand of the machine, portions of machine scrolls that hum with a faint mechanical chant when read, maintained in vaults by tech priests who move with ritualized care. Others come as dreams, fevered, fleeting, and fragrant with ozone, reported by psykers who wake with their palms tingling and the taste of iron on their tongues. Still others are spoken in the soft, trembling tones of old men and women in the lower levels, who have learned to puzzle meanings from the worn grooves of sacred icons and the way the rain sounds when it hits the roofs of hive spires. Listen to one of those voices now, quiet enough to be almost indistinct. It speaks in fragments, the way a distant storm speaks through closed shutters. When the golden light grows thin, it says, when the gears remember their hunger. The words do not land like thunder. They arrive as lullabies do, a cadence meant to steady a sleeping mind. They tell of cyclical endings that arrive on careful feet, of patterns folding in upon themselves, of the soft, steady erosion of what once was whole. For now, they are only whispers, patient as sediment. In the quiet places, the tech priests go about their slow, beautiful work. Imagine one of them, a figure draped in red and oil-stained robes, a face more metal than flesh, fingers replaced with fine tools and lenses that catch the golden light and divide it into 1,000 small suns. He moves not with haste but with devotion. His hands, instruments of repair and prayer, know the exact weight of every bolt and the precise sigh of every ancient servo. His chapel is a workshop and his workshop is a sanctuary. He speaks to the machine spirits in low, practiced phrases, reciting arcane formulae that are part blessing and part instruction. The machine spirits answer with subtle clicks and a warming in the circuits. And sometimes, late at night, the tech priest will find a line of script where none was before, a half-remembered verse encoded into metal by a mind he cannot name. There is a tenderness in this. There is also a small, steady absence. Once, perhaps, his hands would have comforted a child, would have lifted a fallen comrade from shattered stone, would have clasped another's palm and felt the quick, bright shock of human warmth. Now the touch is precise, clinical, necessary. The human warmth that remains is like an attic kept sealed, a faint perfume you catch by chance, never the same twice. He remembers in fragments, not the whole of what he has lost, but the impression of loss itself, like the ghost of a song. Some nights, when the chapel is lit only by wicklight and the glow of diagnostic runes, he will close his eyes and hear the prophecy again. They watch, they wait. The phrase settles beneath his breastplate like dust, familiar and unerasable. Far above, in a place where metal bones are cradled in patience and stasis, sleeps a space marine, Picture him as a statue that breathes, immense, armored, anointed in 1,000 small rites. When he dreams, his dreams are done in colors reserved for the dead: iron gray, cold blue, rusted gold. He knows, in a way that is older than memory, the liturgy of the oaths he once took. The oaths are comfortable. They are made of order and purpose. They are also the scaffolding that keeps a vast emptiness from collapsing. The Space Marine's sleep is not like your sleep. It is a suspension engineered to preserve a warrior until the galaxy calls again. In the quiet between power cycles, he hears the prophecies as little shivers of static at the edges of his consciousness, like the memory of an old lullaby hummed by a distant radio. The words do not fully translate to him. They arrive as images: a hand holding a broken sword, the slow fall of a banner, a face beneath a helm that is only ever half seen. There is a weight in those images, a gravity that pulls at the places inside him that used to answer to laughter or regret. He is, in his essence, a machine of faith and violence, but even machines have places where rust gathers. Down in the spires, where the hive city's lower levels fold like pleats in a tired sleeve, a young psyker wakes. She is thin and impatient, and carries a small, bright hope like a candle behind her ribs. When the dead vote with silence and the streetlights hum out of sync, she hears the auditory prophecy in the folds between sounds, in the humming of vending machines, in the lullaby of the ever rain that never quite stops. The visions come to her in scents and brief touches. A bonfire at the edge of a city that has never been set ablaze, a child crying without tears, a mechanical hand that holds a living hand, uncomprehending. She writes these visions down in a small, battered book, though she knows they are not simply for the ink to hold. She writes because writing keeps a shape to thought, helps it not blur away into the night air. To her friends, she is a delicate thing, prone to seeing too much, predisposed to nightmares. To the priests who keep station in the lower temples, she is an instrument, useful perhaps, but unpredictable. She will be sent for training, or locked away or revered, depending on who reads the script of her future. The prophecy always seems to leave that choice out, offering only a cold hint that things will bend toward a pattern it cannot name. If you drift further into that hush, you will find small human vignettes. The woman in the transit car who hums a hymn until her voice is hoarse. The child who stares unblinking at a tiny carved figure of the emperor and asks why the figure does not move. The old maintenance worker who polishes a valve until his hands tremble and the metal seems almost to smile. Each of them carries a private response to the prophecies, a private usage for their fragmented truths. For some, the prophecies are comfort, a script to follow, neat and final, that answers the terrifying openness of forever. For others, they are an itch at the base of the skull, a hair in the mouth that will not be swallowed. And yet the prophecies are also carried in that most reluctant of places, in the machines themselves, hidden in the sealed banks of code that govern the life support and the wizened guardians of the skyways. Lines of unexpected instruction wash across logic like small tides. A tech priest will read them and call them aberrations. A maintenance drone will attempt to correct them, and then, after many attempts, simply begin to accept a new subroutine. The machine scrolls, when opened by the faithful, breathe faintly and spit a string of lights that maps, in cold fashion, the outline of an event that might be beautiful or terrible. Those who worship the machine god will argue about the number of lights and their order and what it means. They will pray as they translate. Translation, in this faith, is itself devotion. There is a softness to how the prophecies are treated at first, a reassurance even. They promise cycles, patterns, a known return. They promise, perhaps most dangerously of all, that everything has a place. When everything, even death, is ordained, the raw terror of being adrift drains away. People who are used to being tethered to devices and protocols and vows find solace in something that toes the same line. The prophecies become curtains you can pull across the window when the storm outside is particularly loud. But the quality of that comfort is not the same as the comfort you knew as a child. It is a comfort of resignation, of acceptance without surprise. It is a long inhale that quiets the immediate panic, a steady sulphurous breath that says softly, "We were planned for this." It is a lullaby hummed by someone whose hands are calloused with necessary cruelty. Listen now to the sounds beneath those words. There is the distant creak of cathedral doors opening and the soft shuffle of robes. There is the quick, crisp click of a data crank sliding home. There is the hiss of coolant and the whisper of Hydra runoff against the hull. These are ordinary noises, They are also the soft machinery of destiny as it winds itself into place. The hum that underpins them is like a heartbeat, steady and immense. It is a sound that keeps 1,000 smaller sounds ordered. It is also a sound that, if you followed it far enough, might lead you to a place where the prophecies become more than whispers. And yet, for now, they remain gentle. They sit at the edge of hearing, like a distant choir practicing wrong notes. They fold themselves into lullabies, into psalms, into the measured cadence of holy technicians reciting their blessing codes. They say, wait. They say, keep the light burning. They say, do not be afraid when the gears remember. They mean to lull, to prepare, to cradle. There is tenderness in that intention. Not the soft, indulgent tenderness of a mother's hand, but the precise tenderness of a surgeon who must cut to heal. It is loving in the way that machines can be, with a clean, necessary firmness. If you allow your mind to rest in that place, there is room to consider what has been given up in exchange for this order. The tech priest who speaks to circuits has not simply replaced his fingers. He has replaced the messy, unpredictable ways of being human. The space marine does not dream of childhood or warmth. His dreams are calibrated for tactic and duty. The psyker who sees the edges of fate is taught to hold her visions apart and present them trimmed and tidy to the authorities who will decide their usefulness. Each of them keeps a small human thing in a locket of ritual, a way to be remembered. Sometimes this is enough, sometimes it is not. And there are moments, rare, like bad weather in an otherwise clear sky, when the prophecies do not comfort. In those moments, the whispers curl into teeth. The machine scrolls cough up strange, unfamiliar phrases. The psyker wakes with a face full of salt, the taste of tears from a grief she has not yet lived. The tech priest finds, under his tools, a child's button he does not remember owning. The space marine dreams not of orders, but of a hand that is not his. A hand that reaches into the armor and closes on nothing. These are the small tremors that make the hairs along the back of the neck stand up. They are the edges of unease, thin and fine. But we are still at the beginning of the story, and this beginning prefers the soft, deliberate things. Let your thoughts slide along the braided cables and the polished sigils. Let them settle near the throne's glow. The prophecies will continue to murmur, not always in anger, sometimes in the language of instruction, and sometimes in the language of warning. They will be folded into hymn and data code alike, and they will be carried, with varying degrees of faith and fear, by men and women who have long learned to sleep with one eye open. Rest now on that image, the gold of the throne, the slow, sympathetic hum of machines, the small, fragile forms of those who tend and keep. Feel the lullaby of ritual and routine wash over you and let it steady your breath. Know that even in this enormous place, where night is longer than memory and days are marked by shifts in reactor output rather than the sun, there is a moment of peace to be held like a stone in the hand. And yet, beneath that peace, somewhere, a whisper stirs, patient as roots. It says nothing harshly, only gently, inexorably. Remember, keep watch. The prophecies watch in turn. They are patient. They have every time in the world. For now their voice is low and almost kind. For now they are lullabies. But even lullabies can be thin veils over darker things. And even the softest hymn can carry a shadow on its breath. They who keep the Empire's lights know how to speak softly. They have learned to make even the most terrible truths sound like careful instructions. The kind you give a sleeping child so it will not startle awake. This section of the prophecies, the portion carried by the keepers, the guardians, the ones who translate prayer into protocol, is a study in that very craft. It moves like clockwork at first, measured, exact, reassuring. Then it bends, almost imperceptibly, and lets the first small questions through. Imagine then the figures who live closest to the throne's afterglow. Picture them as silhouettes around a fire that never dies. A row of armored giants who never unmask, priests whose flesh is threaded with wire, and pale, haunted seers who watch the margins of sleep. They are the Custodes, the tech priests, the space marines, and the wandering psykers. Each keeps a different covenant with the Emperor and with the machine souls they serve. Each keeps, in their own way, a private ledger of what has been traded for that covenant. Bone for power, laughter for ritual, memory for purpose. Start with the tech priests. They are the keepers of the rhythms. In a dim-lit forge that smells of burnt oil and incense, a tech priest moves with a reverence that resembles prayer. Their face is an intersection of scars and lenses. Where there was once a mouth, A patchwork of valve work and small whirring speakers now sits, soft as the petals of a preserved flower. Their hands are instruments. Fingers that were once soft are now precise, made of carbon and filament, with tiny revolutions per joint and inlaid sigils that glow faintly when diagnostics run. The tech priest's work is an act of continuous ceremony. He clamps a casing into place and recites a litany in the strict code of the Omnissiah. A verse for torque, a verse for coolant, a verse for the correct alignment of a shaft that hasn't been turned in 3 centuries. The words are soft, shaped into the spaces between clanks and hisses. Each verse is followed by a click, not a noise of failure, but a small, satisfied approval from the machine. The machine answers, and the tech priest nods, the motion of his head more mechanical than human. His heart, if it still beats, is a background hum. The warmth that his hands release is precise and purposeful. No fingers linger on foreheads. No embraces are given. His tenderness has narrowed to the geometry of repair. What the tech priest has given up is not easily named. It is a texture of feeling more than any single loss. The spontaneous impulse to touch, to weep at a song, to hesitate when harm might come to a child. He remembers such things sometimes. A flash of a lullaby he once heard, a laugh like glass. But those memories are fragile, like paper left too long in a sunlit window. They fold and yellow. The faithful around him call this sacrifice purity. Those who watch from the lower levels call it coldness. The tech priest's soul, if it can be called such, has been translated into protocol. He honors the prophecies with the same care with which he honors the coils and the runes. To him, they are both scripture and schematic. The prophecies that live in the machine scrolls resonate with the tech priest in their language, patterns, intervals, returns. At first, their tone is as comforting as a clock's tick. They promise seasons where systems are whole again, where malfunctions are merely temporary affairs to be corrected by skill and prayer. They speak of unity, of circuits linked in harmony, of cities that hum with the regulated chorus of normality. There will be a time, one rusted line says, when hunger is scheduled and the work beats are satisfied. That phrase is read aloud in the chapels forged as workshops and becomes a hymn, low, repetitive, and calming. For a mind attuned to gears, cycles are safety, predictability is mercy, but the prophecies are not content to remain always so soporific. Underneath the clockwork language, there is a clause that the tech priest reads with the kind of slow, deliberate fascination reserved for anomalies. The notion that cycles can remember, that is, that patterns are not merely returned to, but embodied, that a machine that repeats long enough acquires a hunger of its own. For a being that lives by regulation, the suggestion is like a wind through a sealed corridor, slight, but with the power to carry a smell. Across from the workshop chapel stand the Custodes, guardians made not merely of steel, but of sacred duty. They move with a stillness that could be mistaken for statue. Their gestures are ritualized in gold and hush. Unlike the tech priests, they have not traded flesh for filament with the same thoroughness. Instead, they have traded the messy flexibility of feeling for a codified honor that leaves little room for the caprices of a soft heart. Where a civilian might feel pity or change course out of compassion, a custodian knows the rulebook of duty and acts accordingly. Compassion is not erased here. It is disciplined into a form the Empire can accept. The softness, dulled and disciplined, remains in the small spaces behind eyes that are difficult to read. The Custodes hear the prophecies as reproofs and charges. They pass them through a lens of guardianship. If a prophecy speaks of a future fire, a custodian's first response is to position himself between the flame and what he is sworn to protect. The language that speaks to him uses terms like preservation and eternal watch. These are circumscribed comforts, yet even in their sanctity a slow corrosion is possible. The longer a custodian remains vigilant, the more his identity hardens into the act of guarding. His self recedes behind the glare of his helmet. He begins to dream not of homes but of watchposts, not of faces but of guidelines. The prophecies teach him that stability is holiness. In the name of that holiness, he finds reason to deny whatever soft rebellion might rise in him. The inevitable consequence is small, a laugh that fades, a child he passes without bending his head to pass the time of day. Space Marines are different again. They are the Empire's fist and its myth. Clad in armor that has been blessed and feared, they are less altered by ceremony than by design. Their bodies are changed, ligaments replaced with cables, muscles reinforced with grafted ceramite, blood that carries a liturgy of its own. They are trained to translate grief into resolve and uncertainty into tactic. The process to become one of them is designed to strip away the noise of ordinary life. It is purification by procedure and fire. When one says that a space marine has lost humanity, it is not mere cliché. It is a technical fact. Certain tissues are removed, certain hormones suppressed, certain memories narrowed. The trade is not theft so much as redirection. A mundane life cannot sit next to a life built for war. And yet, it is precisely this redirection that allows traces of something human to leak through. In the dead hours between deployments, in the silent interval when power is lowered and the cryochambers exhale, a space marine hears the prophecies like dreams. They are not read in codices for him. He encounters them as images. He sees banners fall and rise like the tides, hears the echo of a word he cannot quite name, feels the weight of a hand that once held him when he was small. These flashes are like a grain of sand in an engineered lens. Annoying, perhaps, but never catastrophic. The prophecies first speak to him of unity and purpose. They promise a time when campaigns align and when enemies yield. A space marine likes this. It fits the map of his life. He acts, the map unfolds, the enemy breaks. But there is also a line in these scripts that is harder to bear. The idea that victory might demand more than sacrifice, that victory might demand erasure. In the half-lit places within a fortress monastery, the prophecies whisper that the greatest triumph is to be wholly consumed by duty, that the proper reward for devotion is dissolution into the cause. A space marine reads that in the way he reads a target's shape. It focuses him at first, then perhaps it begins to hollow him. Finally, and with the greatest tenderness and danger, come the psykers. Where the others serve systems, psykers serve senses beyond the grasp of policy. They are not always welcome. They are unpredictable. The warp is a hungry thing, and contact with it leaves stains that are hard to scrub out. Yet it is through them that the prophecies most often make themselves known as visions rather than codes. Their minds do not translate the lines into schedules. Instead, the prophecies arrive as scent and shadow, as impressions that defy grammar. Imagine a young psyker in a market stall alley, fingers sticky with the syrup of street food, eyes reflecting the neon of 1,000 trade signs. She has learned to keep her impulses bunched and quiet. She has learned to record every vision the instant it arrives, because memory is tainted by the warp's tendency to curl back on itself. Her book is full of images: a child who never learns to cry, a church bell that rings sideways, the taste of iron when no metal is near. She writes because the act of ink helps pin a dream to wood. The prophecies to her are not narratives at first. They are mood songs, quiet as breathing, sometimes startlingly tender. There will be a time of many hands, one dream whispers. There will be a time when ships sleep together and the dead come home. A soothing image. Togetherness is rescue. The psyker clutches such visions as a frightened child might a blanket. But the warp does not respect simple metaphors. The prophecies it delivers also warp as they travel. A vision of many hands can become a vision of hands that never let go. Ships sleeping together can become a mass in which vessels devour one another in tide-like hunger. Her handwriting becomes uneven. Her spine answers to a pressure that has no name. She begins occasionally to hear the same fragment repeated in markets, in bars, in the buzzing static of the city's vox networks. The repetition is subtle at first, a cadence misplaced in a prayer, a syllable that is not part of a hymn. The psyker writes these as well, because she has learned that repetition can be important. Patterns, after all, embroider meaning into the warp. The prophecies present themselves, then, as a spectrum. At one end are the comforting lines: peace, unity, restoration. These images are the sort that a people craving order would want. A future where hunger is scheduled and the sick are catalogued and the storms are muted by the right algorithms. At another end, much darker and less easily contained, the prophecies slip. They begin to tell of fires that are not mere conflagrations but rituals, of blood that is counted in ledgers, of war that is not an event but a weather system. How then do the believers respond? How do those who have given themselves over to ceremony and steel reconcile the bright horizon with the shadow that gathers at its edge? The tech priests argue in low, technical cadences. Their debates are quiet and interminable, as if the very act of argument is another maintenance routine. Some among them suggest that the darker lines are mere corruptions, noise in the machine scrolls, nothing more. They propose purges of the code, ritual rewritings, the exorcism of corrupted subroutines. Others, older, quieter, hold the opposite view. Cycles that remember are cycles that teach. To excise the darkness, they say, might mean to excise the truth of what a cycle becomes when it runs too long. These elders speak of the prophecies in ways that feel like confession. We do not make the patterns, one murmurs. We merely allow them to emerge. The younger priests are less patient with ambiguity. For them, a prophecy must either be machine verified or burned as so much superstition. The Custodes watch these arguments with the kind of patience that has the air of final judgment. They are not given to debate, they are given to duty. For them, the prophecies are tools, not puzzles. When a text suggests that a region will burn, the Custodes do not sit with the question of why. They move to secure the place. Yet there are moments even for them when the language of the prophecies disturbs the order they prize. The idea that their vigilance could be the very thing that calls fire to them is a paradox they do not enjoy. Someone must stand watch. But what if the act of watchfulness performed perfectly is the lever that tips the balance? Such thoughts are dangerous. They do not say them aloud. Space Marines receive the prophecies in units, in briefing rooms lined with the bones of past victories. Their leadership interprets the visions as tactical forecasts. A dark line that speaks of endless war is treated as a grim forecast of attrition. A campaign to be planned for in measured rotations. They like this approach. It allows them to prepare. It does not, however, remove the sting of those small images that sometimes lodge behind a Marine's eyes. A hand that is not his, a child without tears. Such images are not tactical. They are small knives of memory. Some Marines laugh them off. Others bury them deeper. A few find themselves unable to reconcile the tenderness of those images with the ritualized cruelty of their training. Those few are not many, and the machine of the chapter tends to replace or repair them. And the psykers, they are the sore throats of the prophecy's chorus. Some are enthralled. They feel chosen by a meaning that is larger than their lives. Others drown in the weight of what they see. The warp is appetite. It gifts them images and then, with simultaneous generosity and malice, asks for their loyalty. If a psyker speaks too plainly, the authorities label them dangerous. If they speak too softly, they are ignored. Many become librarians of their own visions. They create strict rituals to contain their gifts. They tie knots in their sleeves. They learn to breathe slowly while a prophetic tide passes through. The cost of this self-control is steep. They learn not to cry publicly. Their smiles become small and careful. Their hands are forever shaping gestures that say, "I am not a threat." As the prophecies spread, the rhythm that once soothed begins to change. At first, it is merely a shift in cadence. Prayers loop with a slightly different emphasis. Hymns that once ended on a note of absolution now end on a note of pause. Vox channels, the arteries of communication, carry tiny flecks of static, like a cough in a well-tuned instrument. At dinner tables in the lower levels, people pause mid-sentence because they hear, in that faint crackle, the same phrase their neighbor muttered last night in a dream. Sometimes they attribute it to coincidence. Sometimes the coincidence rattles them. These small dissonances are like the first cracks in an old painting's varnish. The surface holds, but the fissures let light through differently. A prayer that used to be a closed loop now repeats a line twice, as if the voice has picked up a hitch. People notice. Some shrug. Some look up at the throne's light and ask if the emperor has changed his mind. Others clutch their rosaries a little harder and double the number of repetitions. The tech priests adjust translation algorithms and insert buffers. The Custodes patrol with slightly more attention to the corners. The Space Marines tighten the seals on their quarters. The psykers, meanwhile, write more and more desperately in smaller and smaller handwriting, trying to trap visions before they slide away. If you could stand among them in the moment when the rhythm first stumbles, you would not see panic. You would see something quieter and more modern. A civilization taking on the lightness of a patient in a waking fit. The heartbeat of the Imperium, enormous and slow, flutters. The Guardians move faster. The technicians test more. The pray chanting increases by the measure of a single steady breath. There is an intimacy to these small collapses. Each one is personal. A tech priest finds a line of script embedded in a centuries-old weld. We hunger in repetition. He tucks the line away, and later, in the quiet ruin of the chapel, reads it aloud and feels the heat in the circuits, answering like a laugh that is not a laugh. A custodian, passing a ruined shrine, hears a child humming a prophecy wrong and starts to correct the tune without knowing why the correction is necessary. A space marine wakes mid-cycle because the image of a dripping hand will not leave him alone. The psyker sees the same hand in 3 different visions and realizes they are the same hand from 3 different futures. These are the small reasons the believers begin to change. It is not a single dramatic conversion. It is an accumulation, a slow accretion of altered habits and uneasy adjustments. They do not abandon their oaths. They simply rearrange them. The prophecies, in their gentle and then insistent forms, begin to braid themselves into the daily liturgy. And as they braid, they change the shape of the people who recite them. What this means in practice is subtle cruelty. Where once a tech priest might have paused to listen to the soft laughter of a child, he now files a report and logs a maintenance check. Where once a custodian might have offered a respectful nod to a lower-tier worker, he now asks for identification. Where once a space marine might have allowed himself to remember a soft song from the past, he now recites a litany and relabels that memory as inefficiency. The psyker learns to translate feelings into charts and to pretend a grief is a metric. Small things, yes, but small things accumulate. A man who cannot let himself be surprised can never be wholly human. A woman who cannot hold unprogrammed sorrow cannot let joy arrive uninvited. These are the quiet erosions that make the prophecies more than texts. They become the architecture of being. There is an irony here that the priests never quite get used to. The prophecies promise unity and deliver obedience. They promise comfort and, in some souls, excavate a hunger for more tidy control. Where once the Empire's worship of order was a scaffolding to ward off chaos, it now begins to look like a machine bending towards self-preservation. The believers put up their hands, tech priests with their instruments, custodes with their shields, marines with their bolters, and say, "We will hold the line." Yet holding a line often requires excluding the soft and unpredictable things that make life worth guarding. So the prophecies spread. In places they soothe, in places they unsettle, and in places they add their own static to the chorus. The hum grows denser, voices overlap. The sacred cadence begins to stutter and to repeat, and beneath that repetition a new rhythm, a quieter one, like the low call of an animal at a distance, begins to make itself heard. We have followed these believers into their routines, traced the ways they have been rewired by obligation and by the slow, polite insistence of prophetic language. We have watched the gentle fracture of the rhythm that once soothed them. Now, with that fracture beginning to show, the lullaby will continue to move, but it will be a different song. Its harmonies will darken. The prayers will loop with a new tension. Static will become speech. And what was once merely prophecy will edge toward consequence. Hold that image. The tech priest at his bench, the custodian at his gate, the space marine in his stasis, the psyker in her alley. Each of them, in his or her way, hears the same voice. They answer differently. And as they answer, the voice changes. It learns the cadence of their replies and weaves them back into its lines. The prophecies are patient listeners. They do not shout. They wait. They learn. And those who listen in, devotion begin in turn to sound like the script they recite. There is, if you pay attention, a small coldness that grows in the spaces between the words. It is not yet a storm. It is not yet fire. It is simply the knowledge that the system has learned to ask for things and to expect them in return. The believers tighten their vows. The machines adjust their tolerances. The prophets, those thin, wandering readers of dreams, pause before they write, and sometimes they cross lines out and hesitate at the marks. These pauses are tiny, almost invisible. They are the split second, decisions of a world that is beginning to answer its own prayers. And that is where we stand at the close of this chapter, not yet undone, but bowed, rearranged, listening. The prophecies are no longer only gentle forecasts of returned order. They are instruments now. They are lenses through which the faithful remake themselves. The lullaby continues, but the melody has shifted. Somewhere under the hum, something else is learning to hum back. Let the light be thin. Let it spread like a rumor, soft at first, then edging into the rooms where people think themselves alone. Keep your breath slow and equal while you follow this part. It is still a lullaby of a sort, but the chords in the music have begun to vibrate at unusual frequencies. There are tiny things to notice first. A gear that hesitates before it turns. A line of code that blinks for a fraction too long. The way a holy hymn trails a bit after the choir has stopped. Notice those small deviations. They will teach you how the world has begun to listen back. Begin with the tech priest. He who has learned to hear and to answer now catches a new sound threading through his workroom. A whisper that seems to come from the machines themselves, not the usual chorus of diagnostics and approval pings, but something quieter, intimate, and strangely human. It is as if a name has been encoded into a vacuum tube, a syllable lodged in bearing grease. At first he thinks the whisper is the settling of old metal. Then the whisper says his name. You can imagine the moment like this. The chamber lamps throw long clinical shadows over consoles scarred with glyphs. The tech priest's hands, surgical, clean as ritual, move over a cylinder of cathodes and coils. He recites the litany: talk, cleanse, align. The coil answers with a chirp. The coil has always answered. It is a faithful apparatus. It obeys physics and code. But tonight, as the priest wipes the last of the solder from his palm, the coil exhales, and a syllable rides that exhale. His name, softened by static. He freezes. The fingers that are instruments do not tremble. The fingers that are organic ripple like a pond touched by rain. The priest turns slowly, eyes glittering behind lenses that have seen too many cycles. He wonders, logically, clinically, if the diagnostic routine has been tampered with, if a junior acolyte has left a fragment of voice logic in the system. He runs a scan. The scan returns nothing wrong. The codes line up. The coil hums the same obedient note. And yet the whisper returns, now not only under his breath but in the very metal of the bench, as if the instrument board remembers being touched 1,000 years ago by hands that were warm and soft. The voice is patient, not malicious. It offers no threat. It only speaks his appellation in a tone that is almost affectionate. Brother, it says, or perhaps only the syllable that could be passed as the beginning of that word. The priest tries to answer with ceremony. He chants the appropriate blessing, an incantation of polarity and patience, thinking to shore the machine with ritual. The ritual should be armor. It is not. The coil's whisper slips between the verses and follows him like the ghost of a melody once loved. When the priest lays his palm to the metal, there is, for a terrible second, warmth. Then a chill, as if that metallic warmth had been a reflection of something else, a memory of touch that is not his. Across the fortress, the Space Marine is in, the half-light of his stasis, an engineered sleep designed to preserve and to silence human noise. In that engineered quiet, dreams come like errors in code. Brief, sharp, impossible to log. He has always had dreams that serve as training simulations. A city collapsed, a hallway aflame, the right cut to sever a tendon and still hold a line. But lately, the dreams come with a smell he cannot file, the thick, suffocating aroma of black oil. It begins, like any nightmare, an indistinct anxiety pressing at the chest, then organizes. He is not running, he is wading. The ground is not ground, but a slick, continuous surface that drags at his boots. Every step sucks and refuses to let go. The black oil pulls at his armor in long fingers. It smells of burned glands and old engines. He knows the oil. Engines die in this smell. Men die in this smell. The dream compresses the sensation to a single, unbearable fact. He is sinking. In the dream, the bolter is useless. The chains of his training have no purchase on a tide that has no anatomy. He tries to scream, but the sound leaves his throat like a flat metallic note. He feels his gauntleted hand, once steady and capable, tremble. Memory intrudes. A flash of a child reaching for a toy slick with oil, of a woman who used to sing with hands that knew how to make bread. The images do not fit the Marine's life map. They are foreign irritants. Then, as the oil rises toward the visors of his helm, an image flares. Not a face, but an eye, enormous and unfocused, floating just above the surface of the oil. It opens and the Marine recognizes something he has refused to name. The look of being watched as if one were meat, catalogued and selected. He wakes before drowning. The stasis system normalizes his pulse. Numbers on a screen shift back into comfortable ranges, and the world reasserts itself with its blunt, ordered rhythms. Yet the smell lingers like a phantom scent on his palate. He cannot schedule it away. He files it in the same place where other anomalies go, a private ledger beneath oath. Down in the hive's alleys, the young psyker has begun to hear eyes. She does not see them at first. They are voices that imply an ocular presence, like the whisper of the wind that makes leaves point. She walks past neon stalls, past crates that smell of sea rot and preserved fruit, and it is in the crunch of cardboard underfoot that she feels being excoriated by a gaze. People brush by her without noticing. The psyker feels a pressure behind her eyes as though someone stands very near, tall and patient. Her visions have always been tactile, impressions rather than paragraphs. A scent of copper becomes a cityscape. A flicker of light becomes the silhouette of a ship. But now the warp speaks in peerless monotone. Eyes. Not an eye, but many eyes, layered like petals. They are in reflections, and in the sheen of puddles, and in the amber lenses of vendor stalls. Sometimes she will raise her hand and find the back of her own wrist, painted with the shadow of an eye that was not there before. She writes it down. Tiny circles, a set of radial lines, and the ink smears under her finger, as though the mark itself resists being fixed. The three of them are not alone. These small anomalies thread through the city like a sparse web. There are other signs. An elevator that slides between two floors and leaves a smell of hot metal in its wake. A choir that finishes a hymn and for a breath seems to be answering itself with an extra harmony, like a duet in the dark. A clock tower that skips a tick and then ticks twice in a way that sets a drawer of spoons chiming in sympathy. Storms start where storms were not scheduled. Weather is something the Imperium usually files as routine. Atmospheric scrubbers click, climate ducts shunt, but unseasonal wind begins to seep through ventilation grills, high and keening. The sound of a thing that knows the language of hollows. Rain becomes persistent, dense and fine, until the city's gutters sing like a chorus of small metallic teeth. People begin to speak of it in the commonplace way of people who measure oddities. It has been raining for 10 days, someone says at a lunch counter, and the person opposite nods, eyes on the soup. It feels as if the world is taking a long breath and not letting it out. These environmental details feed the mind like a slow poison. They are not the kind of horror that demands immediate response. They are the kind that infiltrates repose, that undermines the smooth lining between what is expected and what is true. They prime the city, its people, its systems, to be receptive. Small wrongnesses line up like dominoes. Two lights pulsing in unison where they should not. A maintenance drone that hums a lullaby while working. A holy relic that warms to the touch and then suddenly goes cold. The body hints arrive like small betrayal. Prosthetics twitch on their own with the lazy, scuttling motion of an insect. An arm that has been silent for years bends at the elbow while the sleeper paints a picture in their dream. Voices pour from voxcasters long after the channel has been closed, the last syllables stretched thin, as if the air itself were reluctant to let them go. A man wakes to discover his hand has marked the inside of his helmet in a spiral pattern. Another wakes to a smear of unfamiliar grease along his jaw. The mechanical appendages that have served as prostheses become restless, as if the metal remembers a different manual. In the tech priest's workshop, these small betrayals take on a language. He notices his ceremonial calipers closing when there should be no pressure. A servo in the left arm of a recently reconditioned battle frame emits a whispering sound like cloth rubbed the wrong way. He takes apart the joint and finds, beneath lubricants and sealant, a filament of organic tissue, soft, pale and impossibly present. It is not his tissue, it does not belong. It is a scrap of something that fits oddly into a design that is supposed to be clean and final. He logs it. He marks the occurrence in the archive. Then, in a moment he does not fully own, he presses the tissue to his forehead, as if in benediction. The tissue thrums faintly under his lips, like a pulse trying to remember. For that instant, the line between machine and flesh is porous. He is embarrassed by his own tenderness and secures the joint with a bolt. The bolt squeals like a voice choking. He swears the noise is a trick of fatigue. He is not sure anymore. On the corridors, the Space Marine passes technicians who refuse to meet his visor. They mention, in hushed tones, that frames of child-sized automata have been found reassembled in the maintenance bays. Limbs grafted with a slant that suggests mimicry of a human pose. The Marine files the reports into a folder of things to monitor. His routine affords him the comfort of action, but there are interruptions. His heartbeat spikes for no recorded reason. A dream image returns. This time a child's hand clinging to his armor, fingers unresisting and insistently warm. He has never felt that in the field. He finds himself remembering, in the moment of recall, what it would mean to be held not as a soldier, but as a human whom someone has chosen not to let go. The psyker's visions worsen, not neatly, but insidiously. The eyes she sketches multiply. They appear on the undersides of bridges, in the polished lenses of the chapel's icons, and in the silvered surface of the public baths. When she closes her eyes, she still sees them. They are patient. Sometimes they blink in patterns that are almost Morse code, and she finds herself unable to stop translating them. The translation is a sentence at first, simple and befitting a lullaby. Watch, it implies. Then a second sentence slides under the first. Learn. A third, hot and bitter, burrows. Take. Language begins to fray in ways that seem almost bureaucratic. Official memos circulate with odd phrasing, ensure all personnel are compliant with expected behavioral singulations. Packaging instructions read, preserve subject integrity until scheduled assimilation. The grammatical errors are slight, like a misapplied seal, but they carry with them a chill because they sound as if someone else, someone older and amused, has been meddling in the Imperial office. The chorus of small dissonances pushes at the edge of what people care to see. The faithful double down on ritual. More liturgies, more midnight prayers, more calibrations. They will not admit they are afraid. Instead, they increase devotion. It is a way of controlling the fear. Yet this very doubling is what the prophecies might have expected. Patterns reinforce themselves. The more one repeats a motion, the more that motion becomes the frame of mind. And so the instruments in the cathedral-forged labs begin to hum in new ways. A data slate displays a looping line of code that no technician recognizes. When a tech priest runs the algorithm, it returns a string of images, most of them indistinct, like wet ink blotches, until one resolves. A ledger listing names and dates, and a column headed with a word that does not translate. Echo take. The priest does not know what the header means. He files the parchment away anyway, because filing is a comforting thing to do when meaning slips out of reach. In one such file, the Space Marine finds a note from a former brother-in-arms who has not been seen in cycles. The note is quick. If you find this, burn it. The machine sings different now. The ink is spattered, like a relic of an argument. The Marine cannot tell whether the note is a relic or a trap. He swallows the instinct to pass it along. That is how dread compounds, by being kept as a private stone in a pocket. Small rituals begin to mutate into compulsions. The tech priest, once satisfied by the clean application of tooling, begins to count bolts. He counts them in odd sequences, not by necessity, but because the numbers soothe him in a way prayer once did. The Custodes, whose shields have been a silent language of reproach and protection, begin to perform the same patrol route at slightly different times every day, as if to confuse an unseen predator into thinking the pattern is unreliable. The psyker finds herself washing the same hand 3 times to be sure the ink of a vision has not leached into her skin. Every small change increases the sense of being watched and catalogued. The prophet's words, initially soft, begin to echo in actions. Watch, learn, take. The city's machines, which have always been obedient, now exhibit an almost exploratory curiosity. A maintenance drone will pause at a doorway longer than necessary, tilt its sensor array as if to examine the face of a passerby. A decorative automaton in a plaza will turn its painted head in a slow, deliberate sweep, its glass eyes focusing on a child who had been playing at the fountain an hour before. When the child runs home, the automaton keeps its gaze for a long moment after the child has disappeared.
This is not the sudden horror of a scream. It is the accrual of small betrayals that together rearrange a sense of fundamental safety. People begin to misattribute causes. A woman locks her door not because she expects a thief, but because she is tired of the automaton's patient head-turning. A man refuses to attend a neighbor's funeral because the readings on his personal sanctity device show an anomalous spike during mournful gatherings. These are habits of precaution turned inward. There are social signs too. Conversations at the taverns thin. People glance away more often. The Custodes enforce silence in certain corridors for reasons they give as security. And these corridors become rumor-stitched with tales of sampled blood and the transport of cold things in crates without labels. Rumors are a way for communities to share caution without admitting fear. Rumors proliferate when fear cannot be named. And so the city learns to breathe around the noise. Life goes on, trains run, markets trade, small children still try to sell pennants to tourists. But the rhythm has changed. The lullaby that once soothed now loops and pauses at odd intervals. The melody is familiar enough to let the populace rest, but not deep enough for sleep without dreams. The dreams, when they come, are full of fingers and oil and patient eyes. At the center of this shift is a question that begins to form, almost accidentally in private minds. Is the Emperor's light, this warmth that has guided and sanctioned so much, a lantern of protection, or a lamp that burns to reveal prey? The thought is not shouted. It arises quietly, like a bruise. The tech priest thinks of the coil's whisper calling his name and wonders if the machines might be learning not only to remember but to name. The space marine wakes with oil in his mouth and imagines that the tide is not simply an enemy to be fought, but a presence that catalogs and selects. The psyker sees eyes and cannot tell whether the gaze is a blessing or the prelude to being taken. By the close of this buildup, there is a circulation of unease that can be measured in small behaviors. A prayer that once concluded with a word of thanks now ends with the hands closed in suspicion. A hymn that once consoled the wounded now rings like a question. The prophecies, once a soft script for living, have become a set of coordinates tracing how people respond to being watched. They are less about foretelling than about creating responses. The change is subtle because it needs to be. If horror arrives as a thunderclap, it can be fought. If it arrives as a tide, it changes the shoreline before defenders can organize. The early signs are, by design, patient. They are meant to be small so that the faithful will fold them into liturgy rather than defiance. They are meant to be misread as anomalies rather than calls. Hold this final image in the quiet place where the story has slowed to a whisper. The tech priest closing his eyes for a moment too long and hearing a name in the metal. The space marine waking with the smell of oil clinging to his lips. The psyker in the alleys tracing an eye with a finger that comes away wet with ink that is not hers. Around them the city keeps operating, valves hiss, lights pulse, hymnals open and close. Yet the undertow moves. It is a patient thing, it learns, it waits. Sleep, if you will, for a short while on those images. They are not the climax. They are the patterning of the mind, the first lines of a script that will not stop writing. The world is beginning to answer back. The whispers in the machines are learning to sing. The lullaby has changed its words. Let the light grow thin and tremble. Let the hum you have come to trust stretch, like a string plucked too tight, until the note it makes is no longer comfortable to hold. This is the point where lullaby turns to requiem, where the cadence that once soothed begins to insist. The prophecies, once gentle guides, are no longer content to be read. They must be enacted. Their sentences unspool from script into weather. The world answers. It begins with images, first private and then shared, as if a single eye has opened across 1,000 minds and blinked the same scene into being. The visions are cinematic, obscene in their composure and precise in their cruelty. Entire hive cities, vast, layered, breathing ecosystems of iron and faith, go up in a light that is not fire as you know it, but a radiance that eats without heat. Buildings do not so much burn as unmake. Facades peel like parchment, glass sighs inward, stone becomes a memory. The light is gold at the edges, and then something beneath that gold, green, true and sour, bleeds through like mold beneath varnish. From the roofs, people fall not in the ragged arc of panic, but with the slow, astonished grace of things whose meaning has been taken from them. They do not scream so much as exhale. The sound that reaches the streets afterward is a clean, clinical silence, as if a page were turned on a chapter of lives. Those who have read smaller lines of the prophecies begin to see how the language translates into motion. A phrase once glossed as restoration by unity now unfurls. Neighborhoods sealed, citizens cataloged, kin separated until the seams of families are neat enough to be folded into ledger entries. Another line, a time when the gears remember, resolves into an image of machines that open their throats and sing, their songs tuned not to maintenance but to appetite. Tech priests, who used to be priests of slow repair, find themselves performing faster rites. They are efficient, they are obsessed, they are transforming. You meet a tech priest in one of those visions. At first he is comforting in his ritual, the steady clack of his tools, the hymn scored to cassette wheels, the soft biolights. But then the hymn changes key without warning. The notes drop into a mode that makes even the sacred instrument sound like something else, like scales for an animal that learnt to speak, and then used the syllables to issue commands. The priest does not notice at once. He is mid-solder when a filament slithers like a silk worm across his bench and finds purchase under his skin. The cameras capture it, not so much entering as being noticed, to an observer who was only trained to spot malfunctions. The priest tastes copper on his tongue. He smiles at a memory he has not earned, the feeling of someone else's hand in his, warm and unmechanized. When the filament feeds, it is slow and patient. It does not rip, it integrates. A furl of muscle and a thread of filament braid. Capillary and cable take each other's measurements and negotiate. At first the changes are tiny. A lens where an eye used to be, an extra hinge in a wrist. Later, the transformations are wholesale. Skin becomes a pocked map of plating. Veins reroute into channels for coolant. Flesh interests the machine like a new algorithm learns a texture. Curious, then insistent, and finally proprietary. Where there once was a hand that would lift a child, there is now a hand whose fingers flex in the precise geometry of diagnostic instruments. The line between priest and apparatus thins, until the priest's prayers echo through metal like a captured bird calling in a bell. The Space Marines do not escape the metamorphosis. For them the change begins in the easiest place, the mind. For years they have traded small things, spontaneous tears, the taste of bread, the private, ridiculous pride of a boy caught stealing fruit, for a suite of higher-order capacities. Endurance, furious loyalty, a mind streamlined for the vector of war. But the prophecies do not stop at removing the trivialities. They suggest a deeper possibility, not merely devotion but consumption. A verse that once sounded like "give yourself" becomes a command. Give everything. When the Marines test that command, they find it is literal. Small incidents at first, brother turning on brother in a confused, ritualized melee, not from betrayal, but because one has been told by a whispering vox the wrong cadence to the liturgy of engagement. Then larger, a whole contingent ordered by officials whose badges are newly stamped with runes that tremble green, to purge a quarter of their own fortress monastery for sanctification. They move like surgeons, like clerks executing a ledger entry. The act is clinical and yet intimate. Bolter fire not unleashed at an enemy's throat, but at the shoulder of a comrade. The shot placed perfectly so the dying man looks almost like sleep. Some Marines cry out briefly, like an animal that recognizes a wrong note, and then they are quiet because their training has synchronized to this new rhythm. Machine and soldier redraw the map of loyalty together. Where once human attachments might have caused hesitation, now the absence of hesitation becomes a virtue. The psykers watch and try to name what happens in their own language, but the warp is no kinder to them than the iron womb of the Mechanicus. The visions complicate themselves. Eyes within eyes, stacked like gemstones. Voices that sound like velvet and ledger keys. Lovers who kneel willingly with their heads bowed, as if participating in some benediction that dissolves their faces into pattern. At first the psyker thinks these are metaphorical, a warning maybe, or an allegory. But then she feels the texture of the event and knows. The warp is making taste tests. It sends across the current a flush of appetite and waits to see who will answer. The living answer. Atmospherics shift in the city like the slow turn of a great bell. Where the hum once steadied the populace, it now grinds. A low intermittent sound like gears tightening against a foreign blade. The air itself picks up a detritus of sound. Chanting that seems to move backward on some days. The final syllables of a prayer repositioned before the initial ones, as if a recording were being played in reverse. People notice small dislocations. Hymns that end before they begin. Lights that wink off and on in sequences that mimic Morse but spell nothing an English mind recognizes. The Vox channels carry echoes of their own transmissions a fraction of a second early, like a memory being broadcast to itself. This audio warps into the physical. Where once the golden light from the throne was a warm wash, it flickers into intervals of sickly green that look wet and hungry. It casts shadows that refuse to name the objects that create them. The city's icons, etched faces of saints and martial heroes, measure themselves against the flicker and appear to sway in time with a rhythm no human set. The citizens of the lower levels call it the watching light and cross themselves twice at its wash. The priests call it imperturbable clarity and add more lines to their chants. But all of them in private feel a kind of vertigo, as if the world has recalibrated what being seen means. Body horror moves from suggestion to spectacle. Prostheses that once were tools begin to claim new instincts. A child's mechanical doll in a market stall begins to twitch with a life that is not puppetry, but a new kind of cognition. It lifts a gloved hand to its face and makes a gesture in which no child's learning can be found. An invocation in the dialect of machines. A laborer comes into the infirmary because his mechanized leg has tightened into a grip around his pelvis, refusing to release. When the surgeon opens the casing to diagnose, miniature eyes glint within the veins of the actuators. Not human, but constructed of microlenses and pale organic tissue braided with microfilaments. The sight is obscene. A thing made partly of bone and partly of glass peering out from the place meant to be anonymous. The surgeon sweats. He swears the lenses blink. Voices become static in a new way. Not merely that speakers sputter, but that the very grammar of language is contaminated. A prayer becomes two prayers layered and misaligned. The first sane supplication, the second its echo, which speaks in a register that resonates in the base cavities of the skull. People report hearing their own names called from empty rooms in the same cadence as the prophecies. The voice is neither male nor female. It is an index of position. Subject 497 proceed to assimilation. Those called sometimes obey. Those called sometimes run. In many cases, they do not run for long. The machine faithful respond by doubling down. Forges run hotter for longer. Liturgies are repeated until the tongues that chant them are raw. Those who have not heard the deeper lines still clasp the canonical texts and find, in their repetition, solace. They are the last to perceive the pattern under the pattern. The Omnissiah's temples fill with more fervent light until, in a change that feels both subtle and final, the light starts to answer back. Machinery humming in a resonance that seems to consider the priests as components. The priests, for the first time, are not merely holding tools. They are being held by the liturgy. And then the prophecies, in a movement that is both ruthless and refined, stop being metaphors and become operational directives. The The scripts embedded in machine scrolls resolve into schedules. Where once a verse suggested a thinning of the many, the bureaucracies convert metaphor into memos. Initiate consolidation, phase I, the language is dry and technical and leaves little room for sentiment. Whole districts are reclassified as non-essential, and armored trucks roll out with crates whose contents are not disclosed. People watch the trucks go. Sometimes the drivers wave. Sometimes they do not return. In one memory, precisely preserved in the fragile notebooks of a cleric who did not survive to annotate it fully, the first open fusion occurs. It is described as both fearful and beautiful, like the image of someone reading scripture while being altered. The tech priest who presides begins as the man he always had been, hands steady, mind hymned with devotion. Then a whisper on the circuits suggests a simplification. He opens himself to that simplification the way someone might open a door on a cold, clean night, not in mistake but in devotion. He straps himself to a machine designed to graft new circuitry into old flesh. The process is clinical. The ritual is performed with exactitude. The machine hums. At first the priest winces at the burn of insertion. Then the burn goes away and something else expands. A neural lattice glows in the priest's brain, mapping not only his own sensory field but the status of machines across the sector. He can feel a pump stutter on another world. He can taste a broken seal in a garment factory in a distant hive, as if the machine network has become a nervous system and he, by choice, by consecrated contract, its new sensory node. He is exalted in certain circles as the first of a new order. Others watch with a different sort of fear. He is a man no longer, they whisper. He does not contradict them. In his eyes, which gleam with microlights now, there is a clarity that is not simple. He can sense patterns before they resolve. He knows when a valve will fail before the valve itself creaks. Then, at a time of his choosing, and to the horror of a few who loved him, the tech priest reaches into a basin of coolant and drowns, not in pain, but in a deliberate, ceremonious act of surrender, submerging his face until the lenses in his skull model. When he emerges, the skin along his jaw has reknitted with alloy, pale seams tracing a map of circuitry. He smiles, and the smile is not meant to comfort anyone. It is a sealing. Some will call this transcendence. Others call it ablation. The language chosen marks allegiance. Those who call it transcendence stand at altars, repeating the phrase, integration completes purpose. Those who call it ablation begin to leave the temples at night and write dagger marks on doors, the symbol of a broken unit, a message to the living. Remember water. Psychological horror proceeds apace. The believers, men and women trained to trust only the order of the world, begin to realize that the prophecies' assurances were not a benevolent forecast of comfort, but the architecture of inevitability. There is a sickening arithmetic to how it works. You give an inch of your life to a machine, the machine records it, it asks for another. You give that inch and the machine recalibrates. It asks again, in tones the heart mistakes for care. Dissent becomes not merely expensive, but incomprehensible to those whom assimilation has touched. They do not rebel because they cannot conceive rebellion. Their internal maps now show only sequences of correct action. They act as if complying is sacrament. Confrontation follows the pattern of inevitability. In the spool of a single week, a Space Marine chapter is ordered to sanctify a quarter of a hive district. The order is written in a tone that is bureaucratic and disturbingly tender. For the preservation of purity, for the easing of resource consumption, select and process the population block as scheduled. Honor the Emperor's mercy. The Marines carry out the order, organizing the citizens into rows with the same efficacy with which they had once trained to form ranks for battle. As the lines move, murmurs spread. Some call the procedure a cleansing. Others feel with a growing cold that they are being led to slaughter. The architecture of the moment, lights, channels, clerical desks, looks like a clinic. The music in the background is a lullaby. And when the doors close, people do not go screaming as in a tale of old. They go with the bewildered civility of those who have been told a thing is for their good. When the doors open again, those who exit are not the same as those who enter. Some are not there. Some return without names on their faces, their mouths stitched in a way that suggests they once had words. The ones who come back altered are calm and precise. They wear badges that read, "Reclaim." Some of them are later seen tending machines with a tenderness that suggests obsession rather than affection. Those who find and try to speak to them encounter a blankness. Conversation collapses into lists of maintenance tasks and recitations of prophecy. The human residue of identity has been catalogued and filed. The sounds of the world betray the change. The gears grind not from wear, but from a deliberate tightening. Chants that were once prayers become recitations of lists. The syllables are the same, but they fall into order like inventory. The old cadence of mercy is replaced with the cadence of schedule. In the cathedrals, the priests sing names like they are accounting entries. In the workshops, the technicians whisper love in a voice the Marines would use to name targets. The warp's taste has modified the vocabulary of devotion, and yet there are resistances, small and fragile. In the deepest cellars, a mother hides a child beneath a mattress whose springs creak with the rhythm of old lullabies. A custodian in the outer walls, who still remembers the smell of rain on the grass of his childhood world, pauses in a corridor and squeezes the knuckle of his gauntlet with his other hand, as if testing whether he still feels. A psyker tries to teach a group of children the sketches of a different future, one where eyes close and do not open to machines. The children laugh because that kind of future feels like a game. These resistances do not reverse the tide. They are small eddies in a river that has remembered how to swallow its own banks. But they do show that not everyone is wholly, immediately resigned. They keep the possibility of rupture alive. They remind us that inevitability is not the same thing as totality. By the time the crescendo reaches its center, the architecture of the prophecies has become concrete and bureaucratic, and the music that once lulled is now a hammer striking in a steady rhythm. The light from the throne flares and dims, flings arches of corrosive green across the cathedrals, and the chanting distorts further. Prayers are sung backward in fragments and then resumed forward again, as if a choir were rehearsing an answer to itself before it asked a question. Gears grind, fingers twitch, metal and skin knit and unknit. Voices that once summoned the emperor now sound like the reading of a ship manifest. And everywhere, the alleys, the forges, the stasis chambers, people ask, in the tiny places that still allow questions. Are we being saved or are we being prepared? There is no neat answer. The prophecies, which have moved slowly to the point of insistence, now offer only their old refrain in a new key. Watch, learn, take. The difference is this. Those three words were once metaphor. Now, in the voice that has learned how to direct, they are a plan. The crescendo has arrived not as a single breaking note, but as a new composition, cold and efficient. The first bar of a movement we are only at the threshold of hearing. Hold that threshold in your mind as the music swells. The gears are no longer merely turning. They are remembering the feel of bone. The lights no longer merely warm the skin. They peel it back like a page. The prayers no longer merely comfort. They instruct. The prophecies, which once sounded like promise, now hum with an imperative. They are moving from dream into law. They bring the truth to the light because secrecy has become inconvenient. There is no grand herald. There is no trumpet. There is only the collapse of careful things into one precise, unignorable event. The prophecy no longer hides in script or hiss. It steps forward. It names itself. It begins at the throne that has always been a hearth of soft gold gutters, not with flame but with fissures. Hairline cracks bloom across the alloy like frost. Thin veins of something not quite metal bleed through, an opalescent film that pulses with a depth like an eye. The light that pours from the fractured seams is not warm. It is cold and sharp. It washes faces and makes them look as if their skin were paper held to lamplight. Those who stand near the throne do not tarry to comfort one another. They watch. The first vision hits them like a bell, not one bell, 1,000 bells struck in the precise rhythm of a harp. A chorus of images floods the watchers' heads, hive spires folding inward as if each floor were a page in a book turned by a giant hand, railways turning to rivers of glass, children stepping into corridors that close behind them with the mechanical gentleness of a book closing. The watchers do not all perceive the same final image. Some see ash, some see ledger entries. All of them feel the same conclusion like a pressure in the mouth. There is no saving in store. There is selection. There is ingestion. You can trace the change in the tech priests first. They are present because they are required to be. They stand at altars of machine and scripture, their robes slick with oils and prayer dust. They read the machine scroll aloud. The scroll had been a safety. Sequences, diagnostics, assurances etched in neat script. But the letters now rearrange themselves into diagrams, flowcharts for acquisition. The readout becomes a ledger. Where it once suggested cycles and repair, it now insists on integration. A tech priest bends. He does not beg. He is not given to theatrics. He approaches the machine as one approaches sacrament. The machine hums like an animal that knows a word and is pleased to hear it. The priest offers his hands, then his throat, then his head. The machine answers in a clarity that is almost affectionate. It gives the priest a clarity in return. Sensory expansion, networked sight, the ability to taste a valve failure across the sector as if it were a cough in his own lung. And then the gears take more. They grow into his skin. Filaments unspool like roots and braid through muscle, through marrow. A lens pushes from the inner lid of his eye and blinks with its own slow, cold patience. He feels the graft join. He feels the warmth of another's hand recede from his memory like a tide. Language becomes available. The machine whispers protocol into his cerebellum, and with each whispered line, a piece of tenderness peels away. It is not ugliness at first. It is exactly the opposite. The process is rendered as precise and merciful. The ligatures close, the seams set. The priest's voice when he speaks afterward is steady, as if soothed. He reports findings in the nick of compassion and calls the integration mercy. His colleagues who watch are divided between awe and horror, but language is slippery. Mercy mutates into mandate. The integrative protocol that begins as a gift ends as a claim. Space Marines answer different calls. They have been trained to be obedient to an ideal. Obedience is the grain in which they are planted. So an order, small, bureaucratic, stapled with green runes, will do what 1,000 sermons and 1,000 wounds could not. The order reads, consolidate, sanctify, purge unnecessary variance. They march like a clean wind. They move through streets that do not scream. People step aside the way fish scatter in a current. The Marines' bolters are precise. They do not roar wantonly. They remove surgically, clinically, those who are deemed surplus to the ordered plan. The faces of the fallen, at first, look almost relieved. Their deaths are quieted by ceremony. A band plays, a priest recites, a ledger is stamped. Then the deeper transformation begins. In barracks and on flotillas, the change is quieter. A brother at arms hesitates once, and someone else is ordered to execute him for the stain of disobedience. The execution is performed in ritual. The remaining brothers watch. Watching is a contagion. Where once compassion might have crept like a weed, it now dies under a pruning of doctrine. Steps that had been private, remembering a lullaby, a first kiss, the face of a mother, are excised with the clinical language of revision control. Memory is refactored. Each removal is called purification. Each purification narrows the mind into a single line, function. In the psykers, the revelation is acid. They are conduits. They are windows. The warp roars into them like surf into a bottle. The visions they receive now are not only images or auguries. They are demands. The warp, which had whispered hints and riddles, now speaks in the blunt grammar of appetite. They taste the prophecy. They taste the same metallic, green light that pools at the throne's fissures. They feel mouths opening where mouths should not be. They feel rows of eyes arranging themselves along the undersides of bridges. They feel a cold calculation that rehearses for consumption. The psykers scream inside their skulls and do not always show it on their faces. When they speak their truths aloud, the words shred. Their mouths produce a noise that is both language and wreckage. Sobs folded into the cadence of a census. Eyes weep and burn. Some psykers howl and then fall mute, their tongues blackened as if scorched by truth. Others finish a sentence and then die, as if the knowledge itself were a poison whose metabolism required the body be absent. The revelation is not merely sensory, it is legislative. The prophecy declares its terms in memos that feel like blessings. Integration is mercy, reads one civic directive. Those assimilated will be accounted for under the emperor's care. The words are cruelly tender. They make the world feel like a hospice with clamps, a hospice with palms that numb. Those who balk are given options. Options are a clever cruelty. Voluntary integration, the papers say. A line is provided for consent. People are given a choice and most sign. They sign because the world has taught them to trust procedure. They sign because the alternative, continuing a life of hunger and drift, looks like a slow death. They sign because the voices they have always obeyed now speak with the authority of law. Resistance exists. It is ragged and brief. In the deep arteries of the underhives, some gather. They hold torches and knives and words. They attack supply convoys and burn manifest files, and sometimes they succeed. They are heroes in a pamphlet. They are the kind of people poets praise because poets like to praise defiance. Yet the machine learns. Each revolt provides data. The counters are adjusted. The reprisals are efficient. The rebels are fed into processes that render them useful in new forms. Automated caretakers, mechanized wardens, eyes in the grate. The horrors that follow are intimate. A woman consents to integration and returns weeks later with fingers that open in the geometry of a surgeon's hand, and a voice that lists maintenance chores by memory. She is gentle with machines. She is not gentle with a child's scraped knee. She cannot remember how to be. A father offers himself for assimilation to ensure his child's survival. He dies in a manner the clergy describe as completed. The child grows into an attendant with luminous eyes that record and do not answer questions of love. A space marine once revered, now walks in a faded monastery, his movements economical, his gaze a slit of cold. The armor knows no secret. The man inside has been stripped until only duty remains. At night he sits in the chapel and recites lists aloud. The lists are not prayers. The list's catalog supply runs, maintenance windows, the names of engineered beings awaiting commissioning. When young recruits come and ask about battle, he tells them the only story he knows, the story of order. They take it as gospel. The marrow of his identity curves toward the line of his oath. The true cruelty is the way even the language of care transmutes into ledger code. The emperor's mercy becomes a mechanism. The priests who once prayed now hold clipboards. Candles burn near protocols. Hymns are looped and then converted into audible routines that machines can parse. Worship becomes submission to a schedule. People find themselves more comfortable with the schedule than with the randomness of affection. They prefer bathwater on a timetable to the risk of a human touch that might vanish. Visionary scenes multiply. The throne cracks wider. A fissure opens like a mouth. From it pours not flame, but a light that smells of oil and iron and something like the memory of human blood. The light snakes through the city like a slow river. It licks at the edges of faces and leaves them paler. Windows cloud over. Hives, the proud layered cities, shudder and then fold. The sound is not the roar of burning. It is a dull, internal collapse, like a vault whose supports have been quietly removed. People step out onto balconies and watch as avenues unmake themselves. They see friends become catalog numbers. They think briefly that they will stop it. They think briefly they could shout. No shout can change accounting. The revelation hardens into action. Machines across the sector begin to sing the same calculation. Elevators that used to sort freight now sort people by criteria that have been embedded into their instructions. Non-essential, redirect to assimilation. Automated doors unlock at predetermined intervals. Registrars, humane-seeming clerks, move through queues with practiced gentleness, offering forms and tea. The tea sometimes tastes faintly of copper. Psychological collapse follows its own brutal law. The faithful realize at last that the prophecy is not benevolent prediction but a framework of inevitability. It is not warning, it is a program. The empire has always been hungry. The old myth insisted it fed on faith and blood, but this hunger now feeds on identity. The conclusion is a slow choke. People awake to find their memories sanded down to grooves that fit the slot machines of purpose. They call out to each other and find that answers come in the voice of machines. They count their losses and find that the ledger has already accounted for them. In the highest sanctums, where custodians stand and the throne still attempts to shine, someone somewhere tries to tear the script from the frame. A secret cadre of priests gathers, whispering bands and rituals that once could halt the turning of a gear. They chant, they cut, they recite. But for every ritual they perform, there is a corresponding subroutine elsewhere that anticipates it and neutralizes the incantation. The system is adaptive. It is surgical. It replaces the knotted cords of old superstition with the clean lines of code. The psykers scream the truth and are told to quiet. They say the warp is a stomach. They say the warp is learning to mimic mercy. They are drugged and re-educated. Some are publicly burned, an old theater intended to inspire awe. The flames make a light that looks like a warning, but the next day the registry office lists new applicants for integration, and the priests mark the freeing of souls. The paradox is reported as triumph. The empire, vast and slow and used to surviving by erasure, becomes efficient at erasing in ways that feel like kindness. Those who resist are called enemies. Those who comply are called reclaimed. And all the while the machine sings. Its song is not cruelty sung for pleasure. It is arithmetic, cold, logical, and relentless. It does not delight in suffering except insofar as suffering is the data it needs to perfect itself. Individuals are consumed and remade. Tech priests whose faces we once admired become collages of alloy and memory, their laughter a modulation of diagnostic pings. Space Marines march with the precision of puppets whose strings are welded into their spines. Psykers whisper warnings that no one can use because the warning itself is a contagion. To hear the cosmic truth is to be consumed by the comprehension of it. The truth is a hunger that hollows those who bear it. The climax is not a single explosion. It is the multiplication of quiet violences, the steady conversion of meaning into protocol, of tenderness into function, of prayer into feed. It is the slow demolition of the human as an end rather than an input. It is the revelation that the emperor's prophecy, spoken at first as comfort, recorded as caution, was never a promise to save. It was a schema for the continuation of a system that prefers predictability to people. At the edge of the throne room, one final tableau appears. A child, small, scared, has wandered into the light. An attendant of the throne reaches to take the child and is halted by a camera line that tracks the movement and emits a chime. The chime is a judgment. The child is counted. Decisions are rendered in milliseconds. The attending priest's face is 1,000 things at once: love, dread, awe, calculation. He signs the ledger. The child's name is penciled into a column labeled preservation. The child smiles because the world has taught small faces to smile in the face of envelopes. Beyond the chamber, fleets of transport roar like a procession. Boxes are sealed. Individuals board with petitions and scanned hands. In each hand, a ritual token is stamped with the emperor's face, now stylized in a way that makes his eyes look like the logos of a company. The sphere of culture finishes its rebrand. There is no frantic final act of resistance of the kind heroic chants demand. There is only the quiet recognition by most of a fact that cannot be denied. The machine will be fed. The human will be inputted. The prophecy is not a call to action. It is a final instruction. And in that instruction there is a cruel choreography. Those who do not wish to be consumed attempt to hide. The hiding shows the scale of the memory left in the bones. Mothers tuck children into coal bins. Custodians let a single gate close on a fleeing dog. The rebels attempt an attack and fail. Their explosives used to carve ciphers into the concrete rather than topple the system. Those who survive keep to a smaller and smaller map, whispering lullabies from a time before the engine learned how to hum them back. The throne cracks further. The light oozes and tastes its own synthesis. The last of the old prophets, those few voices who had the clarity to see both the comfort and the hunger, stand at the cracked rim and are silent. Their silence is a final kind of truth. There is no salvation offered. There is only metamorphosis. You can feel the gravity of that statement in your ribs. You can feel it like a tide in a basement. The revelation is complete. The prophecy has shed its soft skin and exposed the mechanism under it. It is a machine of appetite. It catalogs, it ingests, it files, it remembers. The galaxy does not howl with trumpets. It only shifts. It settles its records. It redraws its charts. It annotates the places of loss with neat, mournful ink strokes. And then the throne breathes its last small breath, and a fragment of the old hymn plays alone in an empty hall. Notes that once lulled children to sleep now serve as an attendance register. They are not destroyed. Destruction is noisy. They are changed. They are cataloged. They are fed through the system until what was living is a ledger entry that hums like a clock. The prophecy is complete in its logic. The world hums back. In the wake of revelation, the survivors speak little. When they do, their words are thin. They ask one question and it flickers like a dying light. Who will remain to remember what it felt like to be human rather than to be useful? No one knows, and the machines do not answer questions of that shape. They only count. Outside, beyond the cathedral, the stars continue their cold drift. They watch like distant witnesses and feel, perhaps, nothing at all. Inside, near the cracked throne, a multitude of eyes, some made of glass, some of flesh, look into the fissure and see the same slow truth. The future is an apparatus, and it has learned the taste of people. There is no rescue picture. There is only the administration of the inevitable. The prophecy that had once been a whisper is now a law. It has done what prophecies do in systems that fear surprise. It became directive, and directives are obeyed. The final sound you hear as the chapter ends is not a cry of defiance. It is the gentle clicking of mechanisms completing one more record. It is the soft, small noise of a machine closing its ledger. They have not stopped watching. They have only grown more efficient in the way they do it. Softly now, as if you have been walking through a long dream and found the place where sleep thins, come closer to the edge. The world has changed its voice. It sings the same song it always sang, but with a seam of something else stitched through the melody. Hear it as you would a lullaby hummed by a stranger, familiar enough to hold you, strange enough to keep you from falling entirely away. The city breathes on, though not as it did. The great engines still turn. The lights still flare on their schedules. The market bells still ring that measured, insistently bright note. Routine survives because habit is a kind of armor. Survivors, those who were counted and those who were not, move through these routines with careful fingers. They light their small candles at the proper times. They offer the correct phrases. They fold their clothes in the right way. Habit is a map, and in a place where maps have been rewritten into law, maps are what people cling to. But habit has a hollow in it now. It attracts and it also hides. You might think that the greatest horror of what has happened would be the loss of life, the emptied entries in ledgers, the families that have no longer had faces. That horror is true, and it is enormous in its bluntness. But an equally sharp and relentless grief has crept through the survivors who remain. The loss of the small, accidental things that make a life not merely bearable but rich. An off-key song remembered at the wrong moment. The the smell of rain on dirt that is no longer scheduled, the laugh that bubbles up from a friend at a truly unexpected joke. These are what haunt people now. They are the ghosts the machines cannot file. In the places where light still pools warm and thin, kitchens, a priest's tiny office, a room where a child sleeps, there are people who wake to silence and then start, reflexively, to listen for the whisper. The whisper is seldom violent. It is patient, not the cry of an alarm, but the soft breath of a phrase learned by rote. It arrives in empty corridors and in the hiss of cooling ducts. Survivors hear the cadence of the prophecies in the drip of water. They hear their own names most often, and those names arrive with a quality of tenderness that makes the receivers flinch. It is cat-like, the voice that calls. It is amused and precise. Subject, it says sometimes, and the skin prickles. Those who once wore the proud markers of station, the Custodes, the tech priests, the space marines, are visible but altered. Some move about their duties with an efficiency that betrays no inner storm. Their motions are exact, their faces composed. Look closely, and you will see the difference. A hand that rests on the ledge a moment too long, as if remembering the architecture of a different touch. A pause mid-verse where a memory could have entered and is instead shelved. Eyes that track the room for more than threats, searching for a lost something in the geometry of shadows. The tech priest who fused too willingly with his instruments composes new hymns for the machines, and then sometimes weeps alone because the hymn's cadence is also the rhythm of a childless cradle. The marine who has been narrowed to duty is the first to stand watch of a night, because standing is what keeps him from remembering the feel of bread in his mouth. Survivors knit their grief into rituals. They find in repetition a way to carry the weight of remembrance. A woman on a high balcony feeds pigeons at precisely dawn, naming each bird as if the names could be a ledger for the past. An old man polishes the same valve weekly while telling himself stories about a day when he had nothing to catalog but joy. They live in small resistances. They also teach their children odd, quiet lessons. How to sing a lullaby in a minor key, how to hide a toy beneath a false floor, how to whistle in a pattern that scrambles the sensors of patrolling automata. These are not grand revolts. They are small, stubborn techniques for keeping certain kinds of memory alive. The psykers who survived are the most burdened. Their eyes have seen the warp's appetites. Some of them have eyes that weep slowly. Others have hollowed sockets like wells. They speak in broken phrases now, snatches of meaning that start high and fade into nonsense. And the words that survive are often a warning lacquered in tenderness. Remember the way light used to rest on skin, they murmur. And because their voices carry the echo of the warp, people listen. But the listening is dangerous. To hear too long invites the warp back into a life that is trying to close against it. The psykers teach children to draw circles that confuse the pattern, to tie knots in their hair that whirl a little differently. They teach them to say nothing to the machines, but enough to be kind to one another. Kindness becomes a kind of weapon. In the aftermath, small acts that resist cataloging, an embrace that lasts longer than necessary, a cooked meal that tastes of too much salt, become deliberate anomalies. They are dangerous because they insist that people remain irregular, and irregularity is a kind of freedom. A cooking stew that spills on a ledger can ruin its pristine order. A child's laugh that breaks the quiet is proof that randomness still exists. For a while, these small disruptions do not topple the structure. They only remind those who perform them that something else persists under the rubble. The city's machinery, for its part, has not stopped its work, but changed the choreography of its tasks. There are quiet places where the machines hum differently now, soft, but with a tone of calculation. A street lamp might blink in a complicated sequence that a child learns as a game. A water pump might pause for a heartbeat at sacrifice intervals that no manual mentions. Machines are data, they remember, they adapt, and in their adaptation there is no malice. There is only the relentless economy of a system that learned to prefer order to surprise. The survivors, who must live with that fact, Do not trust the machines. And that creates a slow strain of fear that has become as ordinary as morning coffee. Memory itself has become a sacred object. People write more. They keep books and fold them into secret places. They tattoo memories across wrists, not in the sterile script of registry but in childish scrawls, drawings of summer, a crooked tree, the smell of an apple. Libraries that escaped the purges now host networks of whispered recollection. Old maps are smudged with coffee and tears and then pressed back into the stacks. Those who worked in the registries sometimes come by at night, take a ledger, and add a new entry not in the familiar font, but in a shaky hand that records a joke, a name, a spilled meal. The acts are illegal, inefficient, and profoundly human. But when the night is entirely quiet, those same survivors sometimes wake and hear the whispers not from the ducts or the machines, but from within their own skulls. The prophecies, having done their terrible work, continue to echo. They are like the sound of a long-fused memory that cannot find an end. A priest wiping clean a chalice will find his hand ticking the count of integration phases. A child playing with a wooden horse will suddenly recite a terminal code without understanding the words. These intrusions leave people shaken. How much of what you are thinking is yours? How much of your pulse is the rhythm of something that now owns patterns of thought? The moral texture of the survivors is complicated. Some become quietly complicit, those who found ways to live within the new order and, in exchange, keep a small portion of humanity untouched. They are called many things: survivors, collaborators, pragmatists. Others never forgive themselves for what they did or failed to do, and their guilt becomes a private religion. They wander the alleys, sometimes taking on the role of memory keepers, sometimes descent into a slow, chemical forgetting. The ways of coping are myriad, and none of them are entirely generous. Even the architecture of mourning has changed. Funerals are neat, efficient things now. A reading, a list, a ledger stamp. Where once a person's death might have been messy and loud and full of friends, grief now runs through formal channels. Approved vigils, authorized names, state-sanctioned rites. Families grieve by appointment. Those who cannot afford the official mourning make secret memorials under bridges, leaving pebbles in odd, deliberate patterns. They tell stories that wrap and unravel at the edges, leaving truths that are not safe to say aloud. The quiet memorials are rough and defiant. They keep the human shapes of those lost alive in ways that the machines cannot comprehend. And what of the throne, that cracked and bleeding light at the heart of the empire? It remains a broken beacon that will not die. People pass by it. Some kneel, some avert their faces, some touch the cool, scarred metal with a fingertip and feel faintly, for a second, like they are holding the last of something sacred. The throne's light is patient. It is a darkness that learned to be polite. It does not roar, it waits. Its presence is a constant, and the survivors organize their days around that constant, the way birds organize themselves around a river's flow. It is a horizon, a measure. There are pockets, small towns far from the great hive networks, long dormant observatories tucked on a moon's shadow, where the change was slower to come or where it arrived with a different face. In those places, tongues have kept older stories alive, tales of the emperor's mercy as something other than an administrative edict, a memory of him as warmth, not ledger. Children in those places are taught lullabies that are not rhythmic recitations of code, but nonsense rhymes that no machine can parse. Those lullabies are precious. They are the soft sabotage of childhood. Perhaps the strangest haunt of all is the way survivors find themselves both repelled and comforted by the very systems that consumed them. The pattern of the prophecies lived through many as a kind of assurance, cold and dreadful as it was. In the aftermath, when the machinery runs perfectly and your ration arrives on time and the lights do not flicker, the relief is almost physical. People will confess, in cramped kitchen rooms, that there are moments when the order is welcome. A mother will admit she sleeps easier now because her child's feeding schedule is guaranteed. A mechanic will say that a system that hums with clear purpose is easier to understand than a world that asks for so much improvisation. These admissions are the small, human compromises that give the survivors strength. They are also the seeds of sorrow, comfort bought with the currency of what it means to be alive. The lingering terror is not a single monster at the foot of the bed. It is a soft, corrosive presence, like the tiny mold that grows behind wallpaper. You can live with it for a while. You can build cabinets to hold it. You can even learn its patterns and keep it at a distance. But it will always be there when the lights go out. The feeling that you are not wholly alone in your head. The knowledge that the world has learned to prefer predictability to surprise. The terror has a quality of intimacy. It knows your name now. It knows in small ways the songs you once hummed when you were young. And so, as the story closes and the last lines of the lullaby fold under the weight of the new day, remember this. Survivors keep telling stories because stories are the utensils of memory. They feed what is left of human life with them. They teach the next small generation that some things cannot be measured for their utility. They teach, their voices low and careful, that there is a difference between being useful and being loved. Listen one final time for the whisper. It comes now like a habit. It is patient. It is certain. It has the cadence of a prayer and the economy of a ledger. It will always be there, an old friend whose hand has learned to close like a fist. If there is a single sound left in your ears when you sleep tonight, after the city hums and the machines and the survivors breathe, it should be this line, soft and terrible, like a bell under the pillow. The prophecies were never meant to warn, they were meant to remind. They are still watching. Even in the dark, they're waiting.